sweet to walk in this pilgrim way.
Our Song of Ascents for today is Psalm 131, a Song of Ascents of David. O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvellous for me. But I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. We've been looking together at these wonderful pilgrim songs that have been collated together in the Psalter. They run from Psalm 120 to Psalm 134. And in many ways they capture much of the variety of Christian pilgrimage, of seeking to walk with God through our world by His power and by His grace. Psalm 131 is simple and short both in content and in length, and yet it's a beautiful psalm of implicit trust in the living God. Two thoughts from it today that I trust will help our hearts. First of all, this psalm speaks about true humility. The psalmist David says that he has come to a place in his life where he has truly learned to trust in the Lord. He says his heart is not lifted up. He says that his eyes are not raised too high. He's determined that he will trust God no matter what. He's determined that he will not make his intellect the measure of God, but that he will make God the limit of his intellect. He's determined that he'll humble himself under God's purpose. He'll humble himself in the light of God's person, and he'll humble himself to see God's perspective. David embodies true humility here before the Lord. He says, I'm not going to probe, and I'm not going to pry, and I'm not going to push the boundaries of what I ought to pursue, but I'm going to decisively humble myself at your side and trust in you as my God. And he gives this beautiful image in verse 2. I have calmed, he says, and quieted my soul. I have exercised my will in my heart so that I will be calm in your presence. He says, I'm like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. David says there is joy here in this true humility, to content oneself in God's person and God's purposes, to rest in who he is and not to wrestle with who he is, to rest in what he does and not to perpetually wrestle with what he does, to simply say that as for God, his way is perfect, as Psalm 18 encourages us to see, and to trust in him. That's true humility. That helps us if we feel overcome with either arrogance or with anxiety. Sometimes arrogance can take hold of our hearts as believers, and we can begin to think that we are the measure of God rather than God being the measure of us. We're invited in Scripture to unpack who God is and what God has done, but we're never invited to unpick who God is and what God has done. The Bible presents us with a God who is majestic and transcendent, whose ways are not our ways, whose power and whose glory and whose purpose transcends our understanding. A God who permits and ordains things that we will never fully understand till we meet him in glory. And the calling on us is to this true humility. It's not to arrogate to ourselves the idea that we can judge God or that we can put God in the dock, but to put ourselves at God's side and say, Lord, whatever happens, I will trust you. I won't believe that I can ever comprehend you, though by your grace I might be allowed to apprehend you. Helps us as well if we're overcome with anxiety, because this is a psalm where David says, I'm not trying to work it all out. I'm not trying to set it all straight. I'm not trying to get it all squared or manageable or controllable. I have quieted and calmed my soul, he says. I'm not lifting up my heart. I'm not raising up my eyes. I'm just trusting God. Perhaps for you, if anxiety is a struggle day by day, then that's going to be a daily battle, and God will need to give you grace to calm and quiet your soul. Very often our souls are turbulent and troubled. They're bubbling over with the cares and concerns of this day and the next day and our future. But Psalm 131 invites us to this implicit trust, to this true humility, to say, Lord, when I've done all that I can to worry, you're in control, and I will trust you. There's true humility and there's also true hope. Verse 3, O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. if David calms and quiets his soul, if he believes that God is God and he is not, then he can know that the future is bright and resplendent with the God who is at their centre. Hope in the Lord, he invites Israel. And that's an invitation to us as well. Sometimes we can feel devoid of hope. And a loss of hope is a true horror. To have no horizon is a desperate place. If you're already a believer, you have hope. A hope that's steadfast and immovable and sure and as constant as the character of God himself. Perhaps you need to see that hope revitalised today as you calm and quiet yourself and say, I do have hope. I've hardship, but I've hope. I've suffering, but I've certainty. Because in God's sovereignty, I find my rest. Perhaps you're not a believer. You're hungry for hope. And you've sought hope at the bottom of a glass. You've sought hope through relationships that come apart in your hands. You've sought hope through denial, through intellectualism, through hedonism, and you've never found it. I say to you, hope in the Lord. How do you hope in the Lord? By trusting in the Lord. How do you trust in the Lord? By accepting that you're a sinner before the Lord, asking him to cleanse you through the death of his Son, asking you to make his own, asking him to calm and quieten your soul so that you might know him, asking him to forgive you, and in that forgiveness finding a hope that goes beyond all, even death itself. Psalm 131, true humility, true hope. I trust this will bless you today.
Leaning on the everlasting arm.